Are we good? I'd like to welcome everybody to our Planning and Zoning Board meeting this afternoon. Chair Suzanne Johnson is unable to be here, and I have been asked to act in her stead. My name is Mike Clement. I am the Vice Chairman. I would also like to acknowledge on the stand with us other board members. These include Lisa Hudson, Shelley Allen, Michelle Dahlke, and Steve Ikeda, as well as Dane Astle. Our first order of business today will be the approval of the minutes of well, actually, we're just going to read the consent agenda, which will actually have the minutes on there. And actually, but before we do that, as the video so appropriately explained, if there are some items on the consent agenda that would need to be pulled, and at this point, all but one of the items have remained on the consent agenda, then we are going to pull them for discussion. And I have received 3 blue cards. Is there anybody else who has a blue card that they wish to submit? Thank you for providing these. So the items that are going to be coming off, Michelle, you're going to be reading the consent agenda here in just a moment. It'll be item 4C, PZ 15611. That'll come off. The other one that we pulled off in our study session was 4E. Any other comments before we read the consent agenda, board members? Okay, Michelle, would you like to go ahead?
Item 2A is approval of the minutes from the November 17th and 18th study sessions and regular hearing. Item 3A is case Z15043 in District 3, 1712 South Country Club Drive, approximately 0.63 acres. This is a site plan modification to allow for the development of a retail pad site. The staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Item 4A is case Z15033 in District 3, 2210 West Southern Avenue, approximately 1 acre. This is a rezone from OC to LC and a site plan review to allow for the development of a restaurant and a drive-through. The staff recommendation is to re-advertise the case to the January 20th, 2016 hearing to include a BIZ overlay. Item 4B is case Z15036 in District 5, the 1300 through 1400 blocks of North Power Road, approximately 2.3 acres. This is a rezone from OC to ID1. This request will allow for the development of a mini storage facility. The staff recommendation is to table this item indefinitely. Item 40, KZ 15044, District 5, the 7100 and 7200 blocks of East McDowell Road, approximately 14.3 acres. The rezone would include a rezone from PEP, PAD, 7.53 acres, and LC PAD 6.77 acres to LC BIZ PAD and a council use permit to allow for the development of a transitional senior living facility. The staff recommendation is to continue the item to January 20th, 2016.
Okay. Are there any points of clarification with regards to the consent agenda? If it is okay, I will entertain a motion to approve it as read.
I move that we approve.
Thank you, Steve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Lisa. All in favor, please signify. Almost all there. There we go. Okay, motion passes. That leaves us then 2 cases that we are going to discuss today. Just as a reminder, the first case that we're going to read will be 4C PZ 151611, which is Z15-041, District 2, 2600 East Southern Avenue, located at the north side of the Southern Avenue and the west of Lindsay Road. This pertains to a proposed use as a banquet and conference center. And as we have received 3 blue cards, the order in which we will proceed on this case is first, the public will be invited to speak. Those who have submitted cards. That'll be followed by staff. Actually, the applicant will speak first, then that'll be followed by the public, staff, and then we will discuss it as the board. Okay, so where are we? Mr. Applicant. Mr. Anderson, if you'd like to come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. For your record, my name is Reese Anderson. My address is 1744 South Val Vista, number 217. I'm here today on behalf of Shelley and Michael McCowan. With me in the audience today is Shelley McCowan, and also some of our consultants, Jeff Welker and Fred Wood, who are helping us with our design and construction aspects of this project. This is, we talked a little bit about the site last time we were here, if you remember, on November 18th, and so I won't belabor the point, but I real quickly just want to review where the site is. It's on Southern Avenue between Lindsay and Gilbert. This is a blow-up of the aerial photo of the site. Our request before you today is to go from RS-43 to OC zoning. There's a lot. You're going to hear a lot of talk today about noise, alcohol, traffic, outdoor events. Those are really related to the request for a special use permit. Nonetheless, we think we answer affirmatively on the merits every one of those questions. But if to the extent you have a question today about it, I'll be pleased to answer it. Let me show you a little bit about the stretch of Lindsay between 24th Street, stretch of Southern between Lindsay and 24th Street. This slide shows here that of all the houses that are along this stretch, every one of them are a commercial use except for two, and of course this one here identified as the site is turning to a commercial use along this stretch. These are old homes built in the 1960s. All the lots are acre plus. Some of them have, as you know, if you've driven the stretch, have been torn down and commercial offices have been built in their stead. Back in November when we were here, if you remember, right before the meeting started, we had a neighbor approach us. We thought we had a good resolution on access to his back pasture. We thought we had a good resolution about access to an irrigation standpipe, but it wasn't satisfactory to them, and so we continued the case, if you recall. So what we did here, and again, this is that November 18th site plan, and up in the northwest corner was where the irrigation standpipe is, and our wall was going to the far west boundary. Here's an aerial photo. You can see we wanted to get access there to that pasture on the north side. We're using an alleyway up there, and then you can see where the irrigation standpipe is. This is a picture when you're standing there on site of where that standpipe is. It's not actually on our property. It's just off on a neighbor's, but people to get to it, of course, come across our client's property. There's a photo of what it looks like if you're looking directly at it. This is the alleyway that it exists today. And so if you were to drive out there and look, you would see this alleyway and how it looks. This is what our neighbor to the north, Mr. Barney, uses to get up to his pasture when he brings some hay in. We provided a letter back in November that we are committed to providing access, and that letter remains current today. So what we did here then is immediately after that meeting, and I had in my mind a clear vision at the time for the board, and I could see it clearly, but of course we needed to have neighbor input, we needed to have staff input, and so we went about working on that. And what we did is we left that current wall in its place, and I'll show you a slide in just a second. And then where I just highlighted the area green, we've left that alleyway just as it is today. And that preserves that access for irrigation, pasture access, etc. And so here's a photo. This is looking south, and you can see there's a partially built wall. It comes about halfway north to south on the property. Now, I'm not a very good artist, but I tried my best there to show you what it might look like with that wall fully going back on that same alignment. Now, of course, don't hold this against me, please, board members, but in front of that, there will be new landscaping. There'll be landscape planter islands, etc., and green screening, which is what, when you hear staff talk about working out some of those landscaping details, we have that plan in place. We have a good vision for it. We just have those final details to work out, and we're going to do it as part of the SCIP process, if that makes sense. So forgive me for not putting a more precise wall, but I think I did pretty decent to just kind of illustrate on how that's going to play out. So our project data, real quick, we're 1.4 acres, 5,600 square feet. We're single story. We're not changing that at all. We've got a 912 square foot accessory storage building. That's up at the north side. You can see that just kind of shaded gray. It's a nice building now, doesn't cause any issues, but with changing from RS-43 to a OC, it's now in a setback. So the skip through the Board of Adjustment is meant to address those type of issues. So this is a quick comparison. You can see here, buildings haven't changed, parking layouts haven't changed, but we've maintained that alleyway, which again I highlighted there in green. And in doing so, we only lost 2 parking spaces. Now, I want to be honest with you, of course, we've lost 3, and that's because right there near our east entrance, as we widen the ADA area, to get that path to work with adjacent landscaping, we eliminated a space there too. So from your prior site plan you saw last month to this site plan, we've accomplished all this with only losing 3 spaces, and I think that's pretty good. To me, it's an example of what happens when the applicant, planning staff, and neighbors work together to get creative on some solutions. Okay? Now, I anticipate today, I know Mr. Wagner's here. He's our neighbor directly to the west. And I know he's going to raise some concerns with you. Let me tell you what we've done since our last meeting on November 19th. I contacted all the neighbors via email. On November 23rd, I provided an email to neighbors regarding the results of our meeting with city staff, and we proposed an on-site meeting. We did meet on-site on November 24th. Myself and Mr. Welker were there. Showed him the site plan with preserving that alleyway. On November 25th, I thanked them for the meeting and talked about what the next steps would be as we move forward. On November 30th, I provided an updated project narrative to the neighbors. We didn't receive any substantive comments. On the 1st, I provided the updated site plan to the neighbors. Again, no substantive comments. On the 2nd, I emailed the neighbors again asking for any comments. Nothing received. I did get an email back from Mr. Wagner who said, I have comments. I returned the call and I returned an email. Again, no response from him. On December 7th, I provided again a copy of the narrative and the site plan asking for any comments. Okay, I just have not. I thank Mr. Wagner that Mr. Wagner told me that he received my email. But then on the 8th, I responded and said, thank you. As of today, though, we haven't received any substantive comments from any of the neighbors. Yet, I think they're here today to talk about some issues. Whatever issues they happen to raise, Mr. Chairman, I'd be appreciative if you'd allow me the chance to respond to that. I know one issue they might raise will be access to the site. We talked a little bit about this last time, but we worked carefully with the Transportation Department. What we're going to do is have the east driveway designated as entrance only. The west driveway will be exit only, which will keep traffic further away from Mr. Wagner's home. We'll have business signage that will be lit at night, so you'll be able to clearly identify the site, which will help tremendously. You know, I just have to ask yourself, when someone makes an allegation of, this is the worst thing ever because someone accidentally turned in my driveway, how many of us have ever gone somewhere and missed where we were trying to get and had to turn around? It happens from time to time. It's certainly not purposeful. Plus, we think that what we're doing here is going to solve a lot of these issues. Again, you might ask what our hours of operation are. 9 to 10, primarily Thursday through Saturday, closed on Sundays. We'll have 5 to 10 employees there, depending on the event. All of our outdoor events end at 10. Staff stays a little bit later to help clean up. That's an important part of our good neighbor policy. And then, of course, we're compliant with the City of Mesa noise standards. In fact, the owner has a decibel meter that they walk around the perimeter of the property to make sure they're staying below city code on all outdoor events. Okay. Another question and concern we've had is that some of our people have drifted over onto our neighbor's property to the west. Again, once the wall is complete, we think that will suffice and keep everybody where they should be. We're going to have a small gate just so that we can get out to the irrigation standpipe ourselves, but that gate will be locked and the key will be held, of course, by the owner. So this is our neighborhood support as of September 24th. That's our neighborhood support as of yesterday that I'm aware of. Any questions, members of the board? I do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I had a question, and I know at least one other member does too. You talked about the loss of 3 spaces. How does that impact overall parking? Is it tight, liberal? Do you exceed requirements?
So let me go back to this one here. So our parking required on site is 51. We have 61 spaces that we have, so we're over what the minimum code is. Then next door to us is I'm going to do my best to pronounce it correctly out of respect for the church, the Santa Crani Brotherhood. And we have a shared parking agreement with them. And they use our spaces and our facility when they have church events, such as a dinner or something. They had a potluck there last few months. And they had one of their visiting, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but one of their important church members was in town visiting, so they had a larger event. And they used, we just let them use it as part of our shared parking agreement. We're going to put a small gate there so that pedestrian traffic doesn't need to go even onto the sidewalk of Southern Avenue. But we have that signed parking agreement with the church. And so with that, we've got 116 total parking spaces. So more than twice what you would be required by the code.
So, Mr. Anderson, in terms of that parking agreement, how is that evidenced? Is it run with the land? Is it
so there's a letter agreement between the parties, and I think I've got a picture of it here. I'm sorry to make you wait here for just a second.
No, you're fine. The real essence is can that be easily broken, or does that run with the use of the property in essence?
So we're in the process of right now working on that to make sure that it always runs with the land, and the church has told us, get that together. Okay, so right now you can see here on the screen is a letter agreement between us and the church.
Okay. Ms. Allen, did you have a question? I believe you do.
I do. Mr. Anderson, the alleyway that you're talking about to gain access back to the irrigation standpipe, is that, what is the width of that? Is it wide enough for a vehicle, or is it just pedestrian?
So I believe the width is approximately 10 feet.
Okay.
And it's sufficient for Mr. Barney, our neighbor to the north, to haul in loads of hay with his truck and trailer.
Okay. Is that part of, is it I've been way too long, an easement, dedicated easement, or is it part of the property of your property owner?
Well, so anticipating you might ask that question, this slide here shows us the title report for the Shelley McCowan property. And interestingly, on that title report, there is no recorded easement at all for it. Whether one exists because of use of time over years, perhaps. But the important thing here is that Shelley McCowan, in working with Travis Barney, said, look, I want to be a good neighbor. We don't want to fight over this. Let's make sure that he has that continued access. He could come through the north. I mean, he could come right through the side of his backyard, but it's more convenient for him to bring his hay to his horses on this alleyway. Sure. And so because of that, Shelley said, absolutely, we don't want to fight. We're going to be good neighbors. So, and we've committed in the site plan. We've committed in the letter that we're going to absolutely keep that. I mean, if there's a concern, I think, by anyone that we would want to go back and renege on our word, that would be a site plan change, and right. I bet someone would play this video.
Right. Well, I just didn't. Do many of the other neighbors use it to access that irrigation pipe besides Mr. Barney? So
I'll speak from what I know, which is that a lot of them get access to the irrigation pipe, but they do so by foot.
And is it down that same alleyway?
But instead of coming from southern and go north like Mr. Barney would, they come from the north, south, actually across Mr. Barney's property. Okay. And it's just like if you grew up in a neighborhood with irrigation like I did, then you understand, right? People cross other people's lines to get to those irrigation ditches, and that's the way life is. And Shelley McCown's absolutely committed to maintaining that. There was never an intent to ever close off any. And this solution that we've got here preserves that irrigation access and the pasture access. I think it's a good solution.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson.
You're welcome.
I'd like to turn some time now over to hear from the public. As I mentioned, we have all three that have spoken in opposition and wish to speak today. And let's begin with Mr. Wagner. As you come to the stand, if you please provide your name and your address where you reside. And this will be the same for all three.
My name is John Wagner. I'm the resident at 2550 East Southern Avenue. This has been a process, and I understand the attorney's trying to do his best to accommodate the neighbors. There are still many issues at hand. One which was not mentioned was the alcohol. There's been 4 narratives presented to this committee and to the neighbors. Only in the last 2 that have been issued was there mention there's going to be alcohol served, and there has been alcohol served in the past. The problem with that is that there are no mentions of getting alcohol licenses. The first one was issued on October 12th, no mention of alcohol, October 29th, and the last 2 were November 30th and December 2nd, which were both after this last meeting that we had. And I quote, it's on page 2 of the narrative, that no hard alcohol be permitted at any events. Champagne, toast, and other similar drinks such as wine and beer will be allowed. The problem with that, on a commercial property, any alcohol use is required to be permitted, both by the state and the city of Mesa. There's an open investigation with the Arizona Liquor Department on that. That's the first issue. Second issue is that since this was submitted to the city after the advertisement for public notice, I think it's sufficient that all of the neighbors that gave their support, and I've contacted many of them just yesterday and today, 85% of them said they do not support this project because they're serving alcohol. Now, I'm trying to get, I got some emails today, and Kim Stedman got one email from one of the neighbors today. So I think that if they fairly were given an accurate picture of what this project was, they would not approve of this. So we need to have it re-advertised to the public and given the new information. With that, we have the alcohol noise, issue noise, the traffic, parking, dust, and hours. So if you go, I guess the map is up there. Okay, so for everything from the left of the screen to the right, that starts with 24th Street to Lindsay. All of that is OC district except for 2 houses, confirmed through a planning and zoning employee. None of those properties have a special use permit nor requirement or a skip. So I would agree that this is an OC district. However, the best use of this property would be for a doctor's office, a lawyer's office, a business office, not a reception center with large amounts of traffic. Part of the problem that us and the neighbors are having is either misinformation or, I don't know what the right word is except for using the word lied, adjusting the truth. There we go. So the truth has been adjusted. This right here is a list of all the events that have been held since I've moved in 5 months ago. There is an open code compliance case that has been going on for 6 months or more. I have the minutes here somewhere. So that's an issue. There's also an open complaint with the Department of Revenue because they haven't been collecting sales tax. There's also an open complaint with the licensing department. Now, granted, some of this will be solved once they become legal. The problem that we're having is that if this is what they're doing now with alcohol after hours up to 11:38 at night, parking issues, parking on neighbor's property, parking in a church parking lot, which is okay, but there's a problem with that, and I'll get to that next, is that they've adjusted the truth so far that we don't believe anything that they've told us is actually going to happen or is true. And even based on the committee's recommendation to approve this with some stipulations and conditions, there needs to be more if this is going to be approved today. The first issue is the math on the parking. I don't know if all of you can see this. This is the biggest map I have. I'm sorry I don't have a computer readout. They're basing their, thank you. So they're basing their parking based on this covered area, which is only 2,900 square feet. Well, as part of their special use permit and their skip, they're wanting to do outdoor activities, which you can tell just from that to this is two times or 3 times the square footage. Based on that, there is never enough parking. And evidenced by all of these events here, that they're on probably 60 to 70% of the events, there is not enough parking. So parking happens in the doctor's office next door, which they have written an email saying they don't want that. And one story was the doctor came there on a Saturday to use his own parking lot, and a parking attendant said he can't park there. And then once contacted the owners, and it still continued. Now, granted, there is a Pollyanna attitude with the owners. Oh, it'll work itself out. The attorney has the similar attitude. Oh, we'll work it out later. And you heard him testify to that early. That, oh, yeah, there's some details. Don't worry about it. We'll work it out. If you remember last month, the reason that the committee didn't vote is because he changed the plans in the hallway during the meeting. Based on staff's recommendation, the current plan does not meet the current standards. One of the recommendations for condition is to pave or to hard cover the whole parking lot. In their plan, they said that they are going to use existing site improvements to collect for drainage and storage of water. If you, based on the recommendation of staff recommendations, if we go ahead or if they go ahead and pave the whole property, what is storage for water of drainage contained on this property? They mention on this plan and the subsequent plans that the property is traditionally irrigated, which would infer that there are berms to control water. That would be true. However, this property has not been irrigated since 2006. There are no berms, and if they are very minor, which would not even control an irrigated property. Any irrigation that has been done has been pumped electrically through an electric pump from the property to the north. Also, the next issue with the current site plan is that last month we had a site plan. I can't see that far. The last site plan showed 10 trees to the west, but now mysteriously the council last time said, what about landscaping? What about parking? I've addressed the parking. There's not sufficient parking, no matter how you do the math. If you just do the math indoors, they've always exceeded that. To the landscaping, they said that they're going to put 10 trees. So they took rid of 10 trees, and on the current plan, they are going to install 11 vines. I'm really intrigued to how we replace however tall the trees, 10, 20, 30, 40 trees, with 11 vines. Now, they did replace they put 4 trees in front to compensate for the west side. I'm not sure that meets landscaping requirements. Okay, the statement of supports from the neighbors. They were not told that there was alcohol, and many of them were told personally, and this is what they have told me, so there might be some misinterpretation, but I asked clearly, did they tell you there'd be no alcohol? And they said there would be no alcohol. So out of the 28 people that supported it, 85% verbally has said they thought that they already had their zoning, that they already had their licenses because of all these events that they're holding. Now, these evidence just aren't my word. This is on one of the websites they use to advertise their events. All that information has been given to the city prosecutor's office, the city attorney, Chris Brady, who I think is the city manager, and this is also still under investigation with the Department of Revenue and the city auditor. Sorry, I'm jumping around. So back to these statement of supports. 2 of them have been rescinded, which is mine and my wife, officially through an email, which I don't think has been counted. There have been a total of 80, I don't have the exact numbers because I wanted to get this in writing, that do not agree to this because of the alcohol, and more importantly, what that brings to the neighborhood. Now, they're using a clever loophole.
Excuse me, Mr. Wagner, we've far exceeded 3 minutes. If you could bring some closer to this.
My timer's not working. It just says... Got the spotlight. Oh, maybe I looked at it too. Okay. The bottom line, this is the wrong project. This is an OC district. An office would be great. I'm all for that. As much as I have a disdain for certain professions, namely lawyers, I would rather have a radical religion church there or a law office than a party house with alcohol. We were all told it was going to be church parties, no alcohol, and through the relationship of the predominant religion in that area, 85 to 95%, that's why everyone agreed. And because they themselves don't want to make waves or rock the boat, they've just kind of lived with it, hoping it would work itself out. Well, this is what it is. Does anyone have any questions?
Board members, any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Wagner. This time I'd like to call up Larry Hook. Is that correct?
Okay, I just talked to Larry Cook, and he wanted to assign his speaking time to me. Is that allowed?
Well, I think you've already had it, but that's okay.
Okay. And again, this will be disputed in a rebuttal. I talked to Larry just 2 hours ago. He was face to face with Mr. Reese and asked him, is there going to be any alcohol? He said there would be no alcohol. Now, obviously, that's hearsay. In a court of law, that wouldn't count. But once I get all these people to say that they were told no alcohol, and I have one email given by another person, he just wanted to know that was his conversation, and he asked that I speak on his behalf today.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so then, as far as that particular card, let me go ahead and read it into record. Was that Larry Cook, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, Larry.
His address is there on
11265 Linray Square, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, the final card that I have will be that of, is it Irene? If you would come forward. Irene, thank you.
Do you need my address?
Please.
Okay. My name is Arian Wagner, and my address is 2550 East Southern Avenue. So when my husband and I bought our house in June, we were made aware of the property right next door to us at 2600 East Southern, that it was going to be used as a reception house. The owner, Shelley, assured us a few times that the parties they would be having there were just going to be quote-unquote Mormon parties. We discussed the reception house and their claims about only doing Mormon parties with many of our neighbors that live behind us, and they too were assured by Shelley when she came around for the neighbor signatures that they would only be having Mormon parties there. Many of the neighbors asked specifically about the use of alcohol at these parties, and Shelley assured them that there would be no alcohol. So these neighbors then signed their agreement and their acceptance to the reception house with the understanding of no alcohol being served. Mormon parties, to my husband and I, mean music that is tame and not too loud, no drinking, and everyone is cleared out by 9:30 p.m. about. That is how the parties started out in June and July and August and September. The parties in October and November started to decline drastically. Louder and louder music came along with drugs and alcohol, with a number of loud, drunken attendees at these parties. And I know they said that they bought a meter, but they just recently done that. They haven't actually used it. The parties were also lasting later and later in the night, well past 11:30 p.m. I, along with my husband, initially signed the agreement, but now after learning what I know now and living with it right next door to me, I now do not support or agree to having the reception house next door. I know that they have tried to make a number of concessions with a few of us neighbors, but the truth of the matter is that they've lied from the start to the neighbors about not having alcohol to get their support, and they've lied about a number of other things. They've been having parties without a license, and they've been getting paid for them, but they found a loophole where, in fact, there is money exchanged for having a party there. I don't approve of people or a business continuously lying, not following the rules and codes, and serving alcohol right next door to a residential address. This is our home that we are living in with our children, and we don't want alcohol right next door to us. We don't have to deal with the use of alcohol or the noise levels from any other business right on our street, and we especially don't want to deal with it right next door to our home. Think about your next door neighbors. If you guys have kids, would you want a reception house serving alcohol right next door to your house? Do you guys have any questions?
Board members, any questions? Ms. Wagner?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. This time I'd like to turn the time over to staff to discuss this, and then Mr. Anderson, I'll give you a chance to provide a rebuttal to that.
Vice Chair, members of the board, you had our presentation last month, so we'll just go over the summary since then. We've reviewed the revised site plan that was presented and the preservation of the drive aisle to the back area and the parking and landscape that's provided. We believe that things substantially meet the code, they are applying for a substantial conformance improvement permit through the Board of Adjustment along with their special use permit that will consider some deviations for code, and that's where the final landscape issues will be worked out because they won't meet full code, but we're working with them on appropriate modification of that. You have in your staff report the staff recommendation for approval of the office zoning with those stipulations. We can answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Rosselli, I do have a question with regards to the size of the facility and how parking was calculated. The comments made by Mr. Wagner versus the approval that's as it stands. Could you explain that as to what he was explaining and whether or not what we really have does comply? Does it need the skip to function appropriately?
Sure. Chair, board members, on the site plan, and that's what we were just conferring about too, is make sure we had those numbers in front of us, but the site plan does show how those calculations were derived, and it does account for the space within the house and the patio space and the event area, and those calculations to come up with what the requirements are, and the 51 required spaces that the code would require, and then the 61 that are provided on site. So we believe it does meet the requirements of the code.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any questions for staff? Yes, Ms. Allen?
I have a question, Mr. Wesley. Mr. Wagner mentioned a code compliance case, and does the code compliance case that's open now refer to operating without the proper zoning and permits, or is this something different?
Chair, Board Member Allen, I have not specifically investigated the code compliance case to know exactly what it says between those different issues.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Ms. Stalky?
Mr. Wesley, could you just share with us a little bit about the alcohol component of this? I mean, I'm sure it's not a zoning ordinance issue, or maybe I shouldn't say I'm sure, but can you kind of explain a little bit about how they're allowed to have alcohol if they're not? Are there certain cases where, is it site specific? Is it use specific on the use of alcohol for these types of events?
Chair, Board Member Darkey, I can address a little bit of that, and I'm not sure if our legal counsel can help me if the parts that I don't know, because it isn't specifically a zoning issue. The zoning that they are asking for today is the office zoning, and so that would allow the office uses. The special use permit that allows in the event center, conference center is part of the Board of Adjustment action, and that's where that use really begins to come in. There are certain restrictions on where alcohol activities can take place and separation from other uses and those types of things. We'll have to meet all those requirements as they would come through the city and those state requirements.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Anderson, would you like to provide us with some comments? There were a number of items outlined here. I hope you have some good notes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. First, there are quite a bit of salacious comments levied against us today. I'd like to focus on the merits as you see them. I really want to stay away from the personal attacks. Where would you like me to start? Maybe I could start with Board Member Allen's question about code compliance. I'm also happy to talk about alcohol and what we truly have said, but where would you like me to start, board members? Or
Yeah, that'd be just fine.
Okay.
The ones that stood out to me were the alcohol. Everything seems to focus around that and the neighbor.
Yeah, so let's be
Or-
clear,
go ahead.
because clearly the underlying tone of Mr. Wagner is that myself and my client are liars. So from the beginning on this, when Mr. Wagner, and you heard his wife here today say they knew when they bought the house this was going to be a reception home. There is an open code compliance case on this site. Shelley bought this property this year. She inherited 3 events from the prior owners who were operating it as a reception center. She bought it. She's been working through the process, trying to understand it. If any of you and I, we live in this world of zoning, construction permits, etc. To someone else that's coming into it for the first time, there's a specific jargon that all of us use. There's a lot of learning to get there. As part of that analysis, we hired Mr. Wood and Mr. Welker, who went through and figured out, what do we got to do to change this over? Fire sprinklers need to be added to the building, a sewer line connection, etc. That took time. In the meantime, we have levied against us that we are taking money for all of these events, and that aspersion really comes across as, don't believe these people, they're lying to you. We have been absolutely clear that when we were here before, that we had held 2 paid events. Those events were ones where we inherited those from the prior owners. Since then, there was one last week that we inherited from the prior owners. Now, is it easy for us to cancel? Perhaps, but try and tell that to a bride who has got her wedding reception planned there. All other events there have been unpaid. Okay? And they've been ones where we've had a church event there with an LDS church. We've had the Santa Cruz next. It's all a red herring. Let me address the alcohol, if I could, for a second. Let me tell you what the owners have said to all of the neighbors as they've reported it to me. And let me tell you what I've clearly spoke about with Larry Hook and others, is that there would be no hard alcohol on this site. The owners don't plan on serving it. Okay? But if some group wanted to have it, they hire their own bartender with their own license, and they come in. We've been absolutely clear, and as part of our revised narrative, where we were not hiding the ball, you see that I've sent it to them many times. We have been absolutely clear, and my words have always been, we will have no hard alcohol, but we have wine, champagne, and beer for toasting in those type of events. Now, whether or not I personally believe that's an appropriate thing under a religious context, it's irrelevant. By that same theory, then, the Marriott Corporation shouldn't have any in their hotels. Okay? So here, they're just asking for the ability to do what other reception centers do, and they've restricted themselves even further. I can tell you personally that Shelley McCown is committed to being a good neighbor. He's bending over backwards to do the best she can. It's not her intent to disrupt anyone's lives. There's a lot of other comments here. I can go. Any other ones come to your mind? Are substantively
the prominent
pertain.
ones that came out in his comments that I think.
And I spoke direct. I called Larry Hook. I remember the conversation. I called him from the parking lot of Harbor Freight, and I said, Larry, I'm confirming with you what you were told by the owners, which is there would be no hard alcohol, only champagne for toasting. And I confirmed that with him. So if he's got a different idea today, I'd love to know where someone's telling him something different than what I told him on that day. And in fact, about this afternoon, probably 2:30, I spoke with Travis Barney, who's our neighbor to the north. Remember that name with the pasture. And he called me up and he said, Reese, you guys are going to have alcohol on site. You told us we weren't going to have that. And I said, no, Travis, we've always been clear we're going to have champagne for toasting, beer and wine. And he, during that conversation, said, okay, fine, I understand. And he told me that Mr. Wagner was out there trying to rile up the neighborhood around us with this. So I could tell you from the beginning, from the first neighborhood meeting, we've always been clear on this point. And if someone's had a misunderstanding, please, I'd welcome the opportunity to address it. But I really think that is an issue as part of the SUP. What other comments, questions were raised that I can address?
Mr. Anderson, why don't you talk about the parking? I understand what staff
Sure.
has shared with us, but that seems that we're over-parking events and they're overflowing to neighboring properties.
Sure. So with this, I mean, and I'm not sure where Mr. Wagner's coming from, but we could tell you that we calculate the parking based on the assembly area of the building, including the outdoor event, which includes the porch, the outdoor porch, plus 7,000 square feet of grass area. And those were discussed with Kim Stedman, and we all agreed upon what the correct ratios were. In fact, I think the outdoor area is 1 per 200, isn't that right? Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like you see some of our commercial centers of 1 to 350, so it's a steeper ratio. Point being is we looked at that carefully. Do we have events from time to time that spill over? Yes, our intent is to use the church next door. When we just welcome the opportunity to put up business signage, directional signage, etc., which we think will be able to help focus the traffic in the right direction. To do so now seems a bit counterproductive because we're going through the zoning case right now. Has the owner had the opportunity to take many more events? Yes, but hasn't because of this exact issue. And the events they've had there have been for family, friends, and I can ask her to come up here and swear to you on the record that's the case. We can give you an affidavit. It won't matter. We'll still be accused of misleading. Does that address the parking issue? Yeah, I think that where we have had our visitors park somewhere they shouldn't have, we've worked quickly and diligently to remedy that.
Mr. Anderson, what's that? Ms. Shaw, did you have a question? Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, not for Mr. Anderson right now, but if I could jump back to Mr. Wesley for just a minute.
And please, board members, if there's any other issues, I want to stick to the substance of this, but please ask.
Thank you.
Mr. Wesley, so really, we're only here for the rezoning and the site plan. We can't make any decisions on alcohol. Is that correct?
Chair, Board Member Dalkey, that's correct.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other comments or questions, I will entertain a motion.
I'll attempt to do this one. I would like to recommend that this board approve case number Z15041, District 2, 2600 East Southern Avenue. The approval based on the conditions that have been outlined along with this case.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you, Dane. Any discussion?
I will make one comment. I don't want to reward people for doing the wrong things. I would like to make sure, the owners get the required permits, the licenses, because, I have driven by that place and there have been events where maybe they should not have had it, and I don't want to reward people for doing the wrong things, but I think the zoning change for this property would be appropriate, but again, I'd like to make the comment that those things, they need to get the permits and the licenses for that, and I think the applicant has done some things to at least help mitigate some of the parking problems on there. So that's the only comment I would make.
Okay, thank you. If there aren't any other comments, board members, if you'd please vote. Okay, motion carries unanimously in favor. One abstaining, which is Ms. Johnson, who is not here. Okay. Let's move on to our next case, which would be PZ 15607, which is Z15-045, District 6, the 10,000 to 11,000 block of East Guadalupe Road. This is requesting a pad modification, and with that introduction, we will turn the time over to staff. Ms. Davis, if you will make a presentation.
Absolutely. Chair, members of the board, this, as you stated, this is a request to amend the PAD for a subdivision called Mulberry, which is located northwest of Signal Butte and Guadalupe. The applicant is coming forward with a request to make modifications to 2 out of 4 of their master plans that they're currently under construction with out in that development. What they've run into is they have a series called the Americana series, which is approved for 155 of the lots within the subdivision. Apparently the buyers have come back with comments that they would like to see a wider entrance as they're walking into the home. The builder looked at options for how they could provide that. They felt that the best solution for that on those 2 plans was to take it from the garage and reduce the width of the garage from 20 feet to 19 foot 4 inches. 20 feet by 22 is the minimum garage size in our zoning ordinance, so this is a modification to the ordinance, which can be approved through a PAD by this board, which is why we're here today. Due to the fact that the applicant, it's 2 out of their 4 plans, the applicant let us know today half of those lots, those 155 lots, have been built on already. So it will only affect 70-some lots that are out there. It will affect 2 of the 4 plans that could potentially be built on those lots. Also, there are rules in place requirements in place that the same home can't be built next to or across the street from one another. Mulberry Development has that requirement, as well as the City of Mesa. That, as well as buyer preferences, staff feels will really mitigate the number of homes this will affect. Staff isn't supportive of reducing garage widths. Normally, we have 20 by 22 for a reason. We feel that it's important to have proper width to accommodate vehicles in garages, so people actually will park in their garages. But we felt with the way this development is going, the quality of this development helped, alleviate some of our concerns. The fact that it was 2 out of the 4 plans, and that it's only 70 some of 155 lots that this could. It's really going to reduce it much less than 70 some lots that could potentially have this. Maybe half of that could potentially be this plan. So with that, staff is recommending approval with conditions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yes. Shelley, go right ahead.
And I guess I have a couple of questions, and one for Mr. Wesley. You guys, in 2011, modified the zoning ordinance to change the garage size to a minimum, or garage size minimum 20 by 22. What was the purpose of that?
Chair, Board Member Allen, it was to try and ensure that garage sizes were sufficient so people could really use them, so you could get realistically 2 cars in there, be able to open your doors, get in and out, and functionally use the garage.
That's what I assumed it was for, and I guess I'm worried about setting a precedence. Which I'm sure you guys have all thought of that as well. I just thinking about my own is 20 by 20, and I struggle to get a truck and a car in the garage. It's too tight; it won't fit. You put your water softener, and things start to get. It just doesn't fit. So I guess, I understand there's exceptions, and I feel better now that there's only 35, probably 35 houses that it could affect. But it's still just the idea. I don't want to set a precedence that this could happen again somewhere else, or use this as, people refer to this case.
And Chair, Board Member Allen, if I can just add into that a little bit, certainly staff's initial response was the code's been there. Yeah. The developer designed these homes. They knew the standards. Why should we make this exception? In this case, they went into it knowing all those things. Mm-hmm. But as we did work on it, our comfort level became better as we did recognize how few lots it would probably actually apply to. But we do carry that same concern. And that's why we worded some of the things we did in the report and in the stipulations. We don't want this to set some type of precedent that we're going to allow this. We're trying to accommodate what is otherwise a very good development with something they've missed in their initial design. Okay. That's not applying to or causing a problem with some of their buyers. And 8 inches, we thought we could live with, but we shared those concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is the applicant here? Would you like to make a comment, or are we good? All right. Board members, any other discussion, comments? At this point, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move the motion. I'm going to move that we approve Mulberry's application for the reduction of their minimum garage width for lots 140 to 143, 175 and 220 and 299 to 403 within the Mulberry parcels 2 and 3 as written in case number Z 15-045 in District 6.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Thank you, Dane. Any discussion? If not, please vote. Motion carries unanimously for those that are here. Okay, thank you. In terms of our agenda, is there any other business that we need to discuss, Mr. Wesley? Okay, thank you. I will then entertain a motion to adjourn. Unless you all want to spend the night. We could do that too. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Is there a second? Thank you, Michelle. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you. See you next month. Merry Christmas, everybody.